Hello, Revere, and welcome to the Revere Veterans and Community Show. Today we have two special guests, but before I introduce them, I would like to thank your grandmother, Miss Marion Gale, for giving us the name and address to get a hold of you. Benjamin Joly, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
And Lucia Martin, thank you for coming.
Thank you
Two
for having me.
70-year-olds from Wakefield Vocational High School. And before we continue, I'd like to introduce my other guests. All of us are World War II veterans now. Sal Santoro, who celebrated 100 years of your birthday, Sal. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Eileen Merullo, a World War II veteran who made the Women's Memorial for the city of Revere. Eileen, thank you.
Thank you.
And Tom Hill, I believe you are over 90, Tom?
91, going for 92.
Close enough. Thank you for coming. Okay. Okay. I'd like to give each one of you, on behalf of the Revere Veterans Service and the Revere Allied Veterans Council, a little souvenir, an American flag. And I'm going to be leaving you, by the way. I'm going to be sitting over there. You're going to be taking over the show and ask the questions.
Hi, my name is Lucia Martin. I'm a high school junior at Wakefield High School, and I'm here to interview Eileen for a segment on the women efforts in World War II. So Eileen, first off, where did you grow up?
I grew up here in Revere, and I went to Revere High School.
So, did the place you grew up influence your decision to join the war? How hard was it for you to leave your family?
Well, I had gone to college first, and then when I graduated from college, the war was in full blast, so it wasn't difficult because all my neighbors, all the men in my neighborhood, 15 of them, including Mr. Hill here, all went before me, so I followed right after them.
Did you see that it was a lot of men and women, or were the women a little bit later in the efforts?
Oh, it was mostly all men, of course. I think there was about 151 women that went from Revere.
Oh, wow. So that's a huge difference. So why did you enter the war?
Why did I enter? Because the war was in full blast. My 3 or 4 of my cousins have gone in. One got killed. My brother was in there, and the whole atmosphere was all war. We were deprived of many things because of the war. We had to. You had to go to save the country, sure.
What was your perspective on war before going into?
Well, I wasn't in favor of the war, of course, but seeing that we were attacked, then it was only the right thing to do.
So, what branch of the military were you in?
I was in the Army Medical Corps.
Medical Corps. And what kind of work did that have?
Well, I was stationed at Walter Reed Hospital in Washington, D.C., and that was the amputation center for the Army. So that's the kind of work I did. I helped the men that had arm and leg amputations, yeah.
Was that your choice, or were you put into that position?
No, that was my choice to do that. As a physical therapist, I went in purposely to do that.
How did you get there?
How did what?
How did you get to where you were stationed?
You mean physically, how did I get?
Yeah.
Well, of course, the Army escorts you wherever they want you to go, and so they escorted me there. Yeah.
Were there any drawbacks or doubts you had about going into the war?
No, I don't think so. No, I was only happy that I was physically able to go.
How were living conditions? And what did you see? What were some of the things you see, some of the most graphic or most moving things that happened while you were in service?
Well, of course, the years that I was at Walter Reed, there's nowhere else you could go. You had to stay within their compound. So I saw multiple leg amputees and upper arm amputees, and sometimes in some cases they lost 4, 2 legs and 2 arms, which was one of the most traumatic things that could happen.
What was your least fond memory of the war?
The only thing that bothered me the most is that it didn't end soon enough. There were too many men that were injured and killed, and the whole United States was disrupted, it was a very, very sad time. Very sad time. And I think anyone that would lived at that time was only happy to have it end.
Mm-hmm. So going along with that, how did you cope after the war? Or did you have to help some of the men post-war with coping?
No, I didn't have anything to do with them, but immediately after, when I got out, there was a polio epidemic in Peoria, Illinois, so I volunteered to be in that, and I worked in that for about a year, and then I got a call for an interview for a job at the Naval Hospital here in Chelsea. That's gone now, the Naval Hospital. And so I became a physical therapist, then head of the rehabilitation.
When and where were you when you first heard about Pearl Harbor?
Oh, I think I remembered very, very clearly. My parents had gone away that Sunday to do an errand, to visit a relative. And we were at the dinner table, and they came in, and they said that Pearl Harbor was bombed. I had no idea where Pearl Harbor was. So we immediately went to look to see in the encyclopedia where Pearl Harbor was. And then my parents told us what a catastrophe it's going to be, that the whole country, all our relatives and my brother and all that were going to be called in to serve. So it was a very serious time. Yeah.
How did you feel about women in the war and their role that they took on?
Well, at that time, women did not go into battle, and I still don't believe that they should. But because there was so many men drafted, and there was getting to be a shortage of men, that the women had to not only take over in the businesses and do the jobs that men used to do, but they also could serve behind the lines in the service, so that more men would be free to go.
Are there any stories that you would like to share with us in particular about your experience in the war?
Yes, one little quick one that I might have said before, but it's so interesting. When I was in the clinic, there was a fellow from Chelsea, Massachusetts, which is our next door neighbor, and he had a lower leg amputation, and he was preparing to go home to get married. So we worked very hard to get him ready to go home. And for a couple of days, he didn't come to the clinic. So I inquired and found out he said he wasn't going to come anymore, which is against the rule. You had to do what you had to do. So I said to the nurse, make sure he comes down to the clinic. So when he came down, he wouldn't do anything. He was so upset because the girl didn't want to marry him anymore. She sent him a Dear John letter. Sorry, now you lost your leg, now you lost your girl. So naturally he was brokenhearted, and he didn't care whether he could walk or not. So we worked and worked and worked, and he finally got his amputation ready for a prosthesis, and then he was discharged. So the war ended, and I was home, and I was working in the Naval Hospital, and the doorbell rang. My father answered it, and he said, there's a gentleman here to see you, which is nice. I always like to see gentlemen. So I went in the living room, and he had a big bouquet and a huge box of chocolates to give to me because that girl decided to marry him. So that was a happy story.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Were there any points during your service that you thought, this is too hard, like I can't do this? Because that is a really uplifting story, but war is a hard time, and working on amputations and seeing that, was there a point where you said to yourself, maybe I can't?
Well, I can remember to this day the first amputation I saw, and it was an upper arm amputation. And at that particular moment, I really thought I was going to faint. But then I thought to myself, oh no, you cannot show any patient that anything disturbs you. So from that day on, I couldn't allow anything to disturb me, no matter how serious everything was. Yeah. Some men not only had an amputation, but then they had a very severe infection, so that they not only had originally had to take off part of their limb, but they had to take more off because of the infection. And that was very serious. So it was not a happy time, no matter where you looked. It was not a happy time during the war, not at all.
Are there any lessons or points that you could take away from your experience and pass on to our generation?
Well, certainly I hope you never, never have to go to war. Never. And if you do the best you can. Have courage, do the best you can. That's it. All right? Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for having us.
Hi, my name is Ben Joly. I'm a junior at Wakefield High School.
Hi, I'm Lucia, and I too am a junior at Wakefield High School.
And we are here interviewing another 3 of our favorite World War II veterans. I guess the first question we're going to start off with is, where did you guys grow up?
Where did I grow up? I came from the north end of Boston. I was born in the north end in February 4th, 1914. I lived there for 7 years, and after that we moved to East Boston. And I lived the rest of practically the whole part of my life in East Boston. I lived there for about 80 years. Wow. I was about 90 when I left, and I moved to where my daughter is because she bought a home in Revere. So I moved in with her. I live on the first floor. She lives upstairs. So that's been my life so far. Awesome. And now I have achieved the ripe old age of 100 years of age.
That's awesome.
And from now on, I don't know how much longer it's going to be, but we'll try to make it as long as possible.
Oh, well, I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, on First Avenue and 33rd Street. No, I grew up in Brooklyn. We moved to the east side in New York, and then we moved back then to Brooklyn. And that's where I went to school, PS 115. And from there I went to Harvard High School up in Columbus Circle. And I don't know if any of you people watched the movie, which was called The House on 92nd Street. Did you see that movie? That was a movie about the German espionage, and then ironically it was called Lang's Bookshop, and I always used to walk by it, but I never knew it was an espionage place until I myself watched the movie, so that's where I grew up.
Tom,
thank you.
You're welcome. Tom, where did you grow up?
I grew up in Revere. I was born at home on Tass Street. I was born at 11:30 at night on a Saturday, and that I've spent all my life here, and my family has too, as well as my children. And I've got a couple of grandchildren that are here. So that Revere has been my home, and I really loved it, enjoyed it, and the people. I have a lot of relatives that intermarried, and that's the way we've established a business. I had an opportunity to join the fire department after the war. At the time I was working in the GE, and that they were on strike, and the mayor at the time was a family friend, and he said, take the exam, and I did. And I spent 16 years in the fire department, and I was injured, and then I took a pension, and then I went in the insurance business. And I spent 75 years in the insurance business, about that, and that my family is still here, and that they're going to name a school after one of my brothers. And there was 5 boys in my family. 4 went to serve in World War II, and the 5th one was born during the war in 1943. And I had 5 sisters as well, so that's my heritage and part of being in Revere.
Thank you. Did the place you grew up have any influence on your decision to join the war?
Did it have any influence on the war? Not really. But I mean, wars come and go, but there's nothing you can do about it. I don't personally like wars anyway. They never solved anything anyway. Right. But you take it as it comes, you know.
But by nature, I have an affinity for the military. I've always had that. Even when I was a kid, I used to have, when I was a high school kid, I used to have pictures of going to West Point. I wanted to go to West Point in the worst way. I never made it, but I did, when I graduated high school in East Boston, I did join the National Guard. I graduated in 1931, and in 1932 I had a friend of mine that belonged to a National Guard outfit in Charleston. And at one time they had a National Guard, they had a National Guard unit located on the Bunker Hill Street. It was a howitzer company. And I had a friend of mine that was in there. I said, please let me get in, you know. So he spoke to the captain, they made room, they got me in there. So I put in a hitch in the National Guard in 1932 to 1935, and then I got out. But then, you know, I started moping around and working here and there. And incidentally, when I graduated from high school, it was 1931. The next 10 years were a very, very bad year in our country. From 30 to 40, there were no jobs to have. No job, no matter where you went. You saw bread lines, and they were all over the place. People didn't have a nickel in them. When they said they were broke, they meant they were broke. Today, when a kid says he's broke, they get mass unemployment. But there was no such thing as unemployment. If you didn't have any money, you were done. But I did say to myself, if I ever get a job someday, I'll never be broke again, and I never was. Once I get out of that, once 1940 came along and the wall came into being, I got a job, and from there on in, I made it my point to always save a little money every time I worked. And I live that way. I've always lived that way. I've been very frugal with my money. I don't throw it around. I only use it when I really have to have it. These kids today, they make $100 and they spend $500 a week. I don't know how they do it, but they do it.
Find a way.
That's it.
Mr. Morris.
I'm not that way.
Right. First of all, I'd like to say thank you for your service, Sal, and you too, Tom. Thank you. And we're all. I grew up in Canarsie, Brooklyn, and I knew I would never see the world. So I used to run away from home. I ran up to Redmond, Vermont, got on a train with my buddy. We had a friend. His name was Johnny Matarazzo, and we would ride the freight trains like hobos, and that's how we got to see the countryside. We went up to the Catskills in New York. When I turned 16, I says, I'm going into the Army. I almost made it, but with luck, they threw me out because of my age. So as soon as I turned 17, which is the same age as you two kids are, I went back and enlisted. I took my training at Fort Dix, New Jersey. Then they shipped me overseas to on a ship to Bremen, Germany, which is near Bremerhaven. From there we got out. We went to Marburg, and we were stationed in Marburg for a while, which was the SS barracks. That's where I stood until they assigned me to another spot. And then they sent me to Salzburg, Austria, then to Vienna. And before we go in, that's where it ended. And until they sent me to Berlin later. So that's it.
Okay.
Well, I enlisted in World War II. The draft system was when you turned 18, you went to register, and you registered in the post office, and they did have a selective service officer in the office in the police station, and they slotted you. They gave you a number, and in the slots they had the 18s with the number. Then they had deferred for medical reasons, deferred for family obligations, deferred for efforts in the war unit. Selective service in Boston would tell them we need 20 men, and they would go through and they would find like your number. The lower the number was that you were there the longest and were deferred, and then the higher the number was that you just registered. When I went in the service, we were all patriotic, the people my age, my family as well, that you live here and you want to defend yourself and all that. When the Japanese came in, I had a job at that time. The war was declared December 7th, 1941, and that the president spoke on the radio. I was working in the GE at the time. And then there was programs. The Army had a program, the Navy had a program, and you had a choice if you wanted to enlist, you went in the Navy program or what. And the Air Corps was looking for 200 men a day, and they had an office at 1010 Commonwealth Avenue, Boston. I went over there with Tony Caffarelli, was my chum, and we signed up to be enlisted. And they could only take so many at a time, and they sent them to Fort Devens. And they said, come back in 2 weeks. And we went back in 2 weeks, and that I lasted in Fort Devens 2 days, and I went to Rome, New York. Anyway, when the war was declared, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. They came in on a corridor, and the corridor was like coming down Broadway Revere, taking a right-hand turn on a Broadway where was Hickam Field. And that they knocked out 18 ships. They killed 2,400 soldiers and sailors, and they lost 200 planes there. And as they went on through the war into Guadalcanal and Tulagi, it was like going down Boston Harbor. It was a very narrow passageway when I got over there. And to the right was Tulagi, to the left was Guadalcanal. That's where President Kennedy and his PT boat they were in the middle of the harbor, and a Jap cruiser hit him and cut him right in half. He was a real hero, Jack Kennedy was. Anyway, when I went there, we were in 4 stops in New Guinea. New Guinea is an island that's 2,000 miles long, and it's 70 miles across the channel to the New British Island, where it was Wewak was a Jap stronghold. General Nimitz said, never mind this island to island, let's skip the islands. So the strategy was the Navy would come in, bombard them, the planes would come in, drop their bombs, they would send troops ashore to take over the strips. The natives, they would draw to one part of the island, and we'd leave them there. And the Japs at that time had all of New Guinea but 28 miles, and their next effort was in Australia. I made 4 stops there. I made Oro Bay, I made Finch Haven, I made Hollandia, and I made Biak, which was at the top of it. And going like in a horseshoe around it, you had the Halmahara groups into the Philippines, which was Tacloban, where they made their initial landing. And there's 75 islands in the Philippine chain. And we went up into Manila, and from Manila I seen when they sued for peace in 1945, they sent in a small plane, 1 propeller job, painted white with a green cross on it, and it was the Jap emissaries that were coming in to make the peace pact. We were on our way up to Okinawa, Aichima, which we did. We spent 2 days offshore, joined the invasion fleet. The invasion fleet went up into Yokohama and Tokyo. Yokohama was like Pittsburgh, smokestacks all over the place. And then from there, it's like there were 2 twin cities, Yokohama and Tokyo, and they assigned us to Atsugi. Atsugi was the Pensacola of the Japanese Naval Air Corps. As we got there, there was like a mountainside that had openings where if there was an air raid that the trucks would pull in there. They had underground classrooms, and the reason there that during the early part of the war, General Doolittle had a crew, some say 6 planes, some say 20, and he dropped bombs on Tokyo. And that the Japanese had to keep a small force there because the Americans were showing them that regardless of the war effort, any place in the world could be dropped. And right off the Ginza, which is like Times Square, New York, was the royal palace of the emperor. And that I spent about 4 months there. I spent from September 2nd really till about November 30th, and then I came home in 1945. And that's I was discharged December 5th, 1945. And that's my history of World War II. And
Thank you.
Thank you. So my question is, why did you enter the war, and what was your perspective on war before you entered?
Well, the Immaculate Conception School had a military officer that gave us our exercise every Thursday. And they took everybody from the class, from the 7th grade on to the senior class, for exercise. They gave us a military drill with firearms and everything else. And I knew about squads and everything else, the different things that they had. So I was prepared for it. Also that I had no worries. I was single, and that I should go and defend my country, and which I did, and I was proud to do. And I would say that I was when I went in the service, I was 20 years old. When I came out, I was almost 24, and there was never a doubt in my mind what I had to do. They gave me an order, I did the order, and everybody I was with felt the same way. And I was on a crash boat outfit, which was Air Sea Rescue, which was part of the 5th Air Force. If the planes went out from a base, 15 planes went out, we'd count them, and then if 13 came back, we'd search for them. Sometimes, if we weren't so lucky, the plane would go down, and the natives, if it was in Papua New Guinea, they would bury the bodies. We'd have to take an undertaker with us and bring the bodies back. My unit had a credit. They had 43 boats, 228 men, and that's what we did.
Thank you. What about you, Sal? Why did you enter the war, and what was your perspective on war before you had entered?
Why did I enter the war? I'll tell you. I was working at the Watertown Arsenal at the time. This was after the Depression was over, and we finally got it working because the war effort was keeping all the working machinery in order, and everybody was getting a job then, but there was no jobs before then. And I got a job at the Watertown Arsenal as a lathe operator. Now, if you know me, I don't like mechanical work. I like clerical work. Well, I did it for a while. And then I got so fed up with that lathe operator, I said to my boss, I'm going in the Army. Whether you like it, oh no, you can't go. You have first preference in here. You can't. I said, I don't care what you think. I'm going down the draft board and have myself drafted. And that's what I did. I had myself drafted, and I got in the Army, and I took my basic training at Camp Wheeler, Georgia. After we get through, we went to Fort Meade. Now, Fort Meade is a jumping off point from Maryland to Europe. The other way, Fort Ord is, if you go to Fort Ord, California, you'll go into the Asiatic area. But I went to the European area. After I got through my basic training, they put us on boats, and we went along with a flotilla of ships surrounded by cruisers, battleships, and whatnot, so that we wouldn't be bombed by the Germans, because they were using their submarines to shoot everybody down. They didn't care who it was. So we finally got across, and I landed in France, and I landed in a little town called Rennes, France, R-E-N-N-E-S, and they told it was about on the 4th of 1945. They told us that we were going to join the 106th Infantry Division. That was a division that Ronstadt beat the hell out of them during the Bulge. The Bulge was one of the biggest wars we had in World War II. The Germans fooled everybody. They backtracked, and they went back, and they hit us at where that Bulge took place. And they did an awful job on the 106, so much so that there was hardly any of the old-timers left in that, so they had to reactivate it and build it up as a new fighting unit. Well, when I landed in France, they said, we're going to put you in the 106th Division and rebuild it again as a fighting unit. Well, I get there around the first week in April of 1945, and as you kids know about it, that war only lasted about 3 more weeks. But at that time, we didn't know it. We didn't. They were going to train us again as a fighting unit and go right into combat. Well, 3 weeks later, they said, fellas, the war is over. So I didn't go. I didn't do any fighting at all. But we were laying around there doing much of nothing. So they decided to use us as an occupation outfit. So they sent us to Germany to do some, because we didn't know how the Germans were going to react to after the war, because there was still no love between the Allies and the Germans. And we were there for a short while. One day, we got up in the morning, and our captain told us, look, you're in the 106th Division right now, and we're going to deactivate the division, send a division home on paper, and we're going to transfer you people to another division, which was about 150, 200 miles away from where we were. Well, that was all right. The following day or so, they brought down a battery of trucks to take the whole division to the new division where we were going. I forget what the name of the outfit was, but that was just 70 years ago, a long time. They took us and they brought us down to our trucks. As it happened, when I got down to my truck, the fellows had already gotten their seats, and there was no room for me. It was a truck that has benches on both sides, and there was room to put your duffel bag, because the duffel bag was their home. They had all their belongings in there, and we were going to go to a new division. So, well, they got there, and they got me, and I said, well, that's all right. I don't have to have a seat. I can get on top of the duffel bag and lay there. You know, I can get there just as well. It doesn't bother me. So I crawled up on the duffel bag, and we went on our way. Halfway through the journey, I heard somebody yell out, fellas, the Red Cross truck is here. If anybody wants coffee and donuts, come on down and we'll give you coffee and donuts. I wasn't quite asleep up there, so I thought maybe I'll jump off and get myself a coffee and donut. Well, when I hit the street and jumped off the sack of duffel bag, I went down like a ton of bricks, and I didn't know what hit me. I had no idea. I was gasping for air. I couldn't breathe. It seemed that the trucks that we had exhaust all the way back, and they had the canopy overhead because it was a misty and wet day, and they were trying to protect us from the rain, you know. It would look like a covered wagon, only instead of horse-drawn, it was a mechanized car. So I jumped off and I collapsed, and the fellows were picking me up, wondering what happened to me. They were saying, by God, this guy looks like he's not going to make it. He's not going to make it. They didn't know what was going on. So somebody said, there's a hospital unit nearby. So I thought, well, you know, they called up, and they told the fellows what happened. They said, well, from what we hear from you, it sounds like he took a big dose of carbon monoxide. I don't know if you know carbon monoxide. Well, I did, and they said, don't take him here, because there's nothing we can do for him. Throw him out in the air. If he makes it, he makes it. If he doesn't, that's it. So as luck would have it, somebody thought about going to the Red Cross truck and seeing if they had something to help me while I was gasping for air. They said they had ammonia vials. They took it and stuck it under my nose, and they worked on me for about 15 or 20 minutes until I was back to my own self again. Now that it was raining, so the officer said, from now on we'll go the rest of the way wet rather than dying. They took all the canopies off, and we went the rest of the way without any event. And if it hadn't been for coffee and donuts, I wouldn't be here to tell you this story, because they told me that if we had gone the whole length of the way, they would have found me dead at the end of my destination, because carbon monoxide has no smell, no nothing to it, and nobody knows it, you know. And I was getting in the fumes of the exhaust, and it was going into the truck, and I was on the top of the duffel bag, and I got the brunt of it all. And they threw me out, and that luck would have it, I came to, and that was it. If it hadn't been for the donuts, I'd never be able to tell you this tale. That's how I came very, very close to dying. And that's it. But I'm still here.
You are.
And that was almost 70 years ago. That's it.
Mr. Morris.
Yes, sir.
Where were you first stationed? Do you have any stories you'd like to tell everybody about?
The what?
It's Mr.
No,
Morris.
where I was first stationed. When I got over into Germany, first they shipped me to Vienna. And then they decided what they were going to do with me. So they asked me if I spoke any foreign language, and I told them my father was born in Germany, I could speak German, and they lit up like a Christmas tree because they were looking for interpreters. So they sent me to Salzburg, Austria, which was a DP camp, displaced person camp, refugees from the different countries. They asked me to interrogate the people to see if I can help them get relocated. Then there was a Captain Allegro, if I remember his name correctly, came over to me one day. He says, when you get done here, I'm going to have you transferred to Berlin, to AMGUS, which was known as the Office of Military Government U.S., so they called it AMGUS. General Lucia D. Clay was the commanding officer of the Allied troops, and it was divided into 4 zones. And they wanted me to interrogate German so-called Nazis, that they had prisoners there, to find out where they came from, if any of them were involved in, let's say, crimes against humanity, because they didn't want them to be head of the towns, like the police, the mayor,
Right.
so they didn't want none of them there. And the only way I asked, how do I know who's a Nazi or not? And the captain said to me, the DPs had the numbers tattooed on their arm. The Nazis had it tattooed on their left arm underneath here. So if you looked there, you would either see a number or a scar. If you saw any one of the two, don't do it. But before I go about that, I'd like to give you something. And I took some pictures for you to take back to your high school to tell the other kids. This is Admiral Yamamoto. He was the architect of Pearl Harbor. Went to school right here in Boston, by the way. And that's how he paid us back. His first name was Isaruku. And he wrote something here, I'm looking forward to dictating peace in the United States and the White House of Washington. So I'd like to donate that to you,
Thank
to
you
the
very
vocational
much.
school. This one here is Hermann Göring, who was the second-ranking high Nazi under Hitler at the Nuremberg. This is a picture of him at the Nuremberg trial. I would like to donate that to you for the high school. Now, when I was a kid, we used to buy bonds, and what we did is you would buy a little book, and if you had a dime, you would put a dime in the little corner, and when you had enough to buy a war bond, you bought a war bond, what is. So this one says, doing all you can, brother, buy you a savings bonds. So that's for you.
Thank you.
This is called Einsatz der Deutsche Kriegsmarine. I'm sure you understand what I said. Okay. This is the mission of the German Navy that the Germans used to put out, so I thought you liked that. That's the flag, always red and black, always red and black. And this is when you wanted to vote for Hitler, you voted on December the 4th. You voted for the Fuhrer. I thought you liked that,
Yeah,
so
that's awesome.
I would give you that. And when I was in Austria, I have to tell you, I went down to a town called Braunau am Inn. Braunau am Inn. That's where he was born in there.
Really?
So I went to visit his birthplace. When I was stationed in Salzburg, I was never into music, but there's a river there called the Salzach, S-A-L-Z-A-C-A, Salzach River. Mozart's house. I'm sure you heard of Mozart, the great composer. His house is right at the edge of the water there, so we went there. They also have the Pascha play at the Mirabel Gardens in Salzburg, Austria. I was there. I'll just give you quick towns in Germany. I was in Kassel, Germany, which was the industrial, they made of steel. I was in Munich, Germany, where they had the beer hole where Hitler first started in 1923 with the Nazi. I was at Berchtesgaden, which they called the Berghof, where he lived. Beautiful place, but it was bombed when I got there. I was in Berlin. I was in Bremerhaven, Marburg, and going back to Austria, I was in Saalfelden, Selmsee, Linz, Graz. I'm trying to think of the other towns. Well, anyway, that's where I spend my time. And the reason I wanted to get into the Army, because I knew if I stayed in Brooklyn as a kid, I would never be able to afford to go anywhere because we were 6 brothers and 1 sister. So I joined the Army.
Were all of your brothers in the Army?
No, I was the only one. My younger brother was in the Korean War.
Korean War.
Could I tell them about Tokyo Roads?
Yeah.
They had
Sure.
a propaganda operator, and she came from Los Angeles, California. Her mother and father were Japanese, and that when they came here, they opened a store or whatever it was. She grew up here, and she went to UCLA and got a degree from there. Her mother's sister was very sick, so the mother sent her back to Germany, to Japan, and when the war broke out, they took her as a prisoner. They used her for propaganda, and when we landed in New Guinea, she welcomed us. The USS Cape Consonance even mentioned the name of your officers aboard, and she played our music and everything else. And all day long she was on the radio and propaganda. At the end of the war, the American government took her back as a prisoner, convicted her. She went to jail. And in sometime, I think it was 1947, Gerald Ford gave her a complete pardon on his last day in office. And the reason for it, they said that she was innocent and was like a prisoner, and that the evidence used against her was provided by a Chicago newspaper, a couple of them, and was all falsified. And all during the war, she played American. How do you like Joe DiMaggio? Babe Ruth can go to hell, and everything else, and it was really something.
Right, Tommy, and we had one, if I may interrupt. He had a Tokyo Roast we had in Germany before I got there, Axis Sally. And she did the same thing to the German troops, to the American troops in Europe, what Tokyo Roast did to the American troops in the Orient. In there. So wow. I forgot to mention that to you.
Use everything that, whatever the Americans were doing, she told you about it the next day.
Really?
And unbelievable.
By the way, I've got to ask you a question, if I may.
Sure.
What made you get interested in doing the World War II?
Well, we are...
Both of you.
All right, I'll go first. We're currently learning about World War II right now in our history class, and our history teacher was telling us how interesting World War II veterans are and how knowledgeable you guys are about that time period. So I think both of us just got really interested. We wanted to talk to you guys to see what it was really like.
You know, they call us the greatest generation, but I'll be honest with you. We are the greatest generation. We are. But so is every veteran that has served up to Afghanistan, also part of the greatest generation. So I want to salute all the veterans out there and all the troops out there. Am I right on that, Sal?
That's right. You're right.
16 million World War II, 400,000 didn't come back.
That was one war you had to fight. The World War II was. The other wars were not. The Vietnam and Korean, we should never been in those. We stuck on those and something that was none of our business. But the World War II was essential because Hitler was a madman. He was going to conquer the whole world. We had to get in and stop him. But there was no need of the Asiatic Wars. No need of it at all.
What was it like being a part of that morale and patriotism of the U.S. troops?
I don't know whether it was patriotism or not. I think it was more political than anything.
We never thought about patriotism. I'd like to say one thing. When I was stationed in Berlin, during, I think it was 48, they had the Berlin blockade. This was our Russian allies, by the way, that we fought with in World War II. What they did to us is that they wouldn't let us bring any supplies in by railroad or by automobile or by truck. So we had to fly the food into Tempelhof Air Base from Frankfurt, Rhine, Maine. And the planes used to come in between houses that where the wings were no more than maybe 5 feet on each side clear. They had about 10, 12 feet clearance. And a lot of planes crashed, a lot of the pilots got killed. But they did bring us in coal, they did bring us in potatoes, and when the planes would fly over, the kids, the German kids, they would drop chocolate, right? Chocolate and lollipops. And they used to call us the chocolate soldiers, remember? By the way, him and I were both in the occupation. He never got an Army of Occupation medal, but I think he deserves one. He does.
I spent 6 months in Germany. I never got an occupation medal for it. I don't know whether they forgot about it or not, but I did get the Good Conduct Medal, the European Theatre of Occupation Medal, and the Victory Medal, but I never got the occupation.
You know why, Sal? That medal comes from Germany, all the Philippines, wherever that nation gives you the medal.
Yeah, right.
And the Americans don't have the medal.
I spent 6 months in Germany.
Yeah.
And all you need is 30 days to get a medal.
That's right.
One day.
30 days.
Next question, son.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, it's all water under the...
I'm going to go.
I have another medal. They're a big deal.
Okay. Sal, you can start us off for this one. What was your least fond memory of the war?
What's that?
Your least fond memory.
The least
fond
memory?
Yeah,
memory.
So your worst memory.
Well, I don't know whether it was the least memory. I can't imagine that, because I said I had an affinity for the military. I always loved the military for some reason. As a kid, I know it doesn't sound logical to be a lover of the Army and yet to realize that going to war doesn't prove anything. You know what I mean? But I was like, that's how I was. I was a kid. I loved West Point. Oh God, that I love West Point. I would have given my right arm to go to West Point, but never happened. And so look at you, go about your life and do the best you can. That's it. I did go to Bentley's after I graduated from high school. I graduated from Bentley. At that time, when I graduated in 1940, it was Bentley School of Accounting and Finance. Now they give degrees, but when I get through, all you got was a diploma in those days. That's all you got. But that's all water on the dam. That's it.
The terror of a bombing. Brutal. We had what they used to be one bomb Charlie. One bomb Charlie was the Jap that would come in between 11 o'clock at night and 2 o'clock in the morning, drop one bomb and leave. And you couldn't sleep. You were waiting for one bomb Charlie to drop it. The Japanese aircraft were not synchronized. Go put, 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 and you'd know they're coming. And you'd wait for it till he dropped that bomb.
I tell you.
You know, right under the table, under the bed, any place that you figure that you could be safe, in safety.
You know, I give the English, I admire the English. They took a lot of what a beating they took. Yeah. And yet they got a lot of courage, those people. I admire them. There was nobody that took the beating that England took. They were bombed day after day after, and they kept at it. And their Air Force beat the German Air Force. And that's why today they're great people, for my money.
Right, and that's the one that Winston Churchill said about the British Air Force when he said, never was so much owned by so many to so few. He was talking about the British Air Force.
Absolutely right.
My saddest... Go ahead, Sal. You want to finish?
No, you were right.
My saddest memory was when I was interrogating the people in Salzburg, Austria. There was one gentleman, he came out of a concentration camp called Buchenwald with his number. And he was telling me about a woman there, Ilse Koch was her name. And they call her the Beast of Buchenwald. She would go around and let's say she didn't like you. She would kill you. She'd ride on a horse and make you run like a gladiator, and then she'd come after you and kill you. And she would take your skin if you had tattoos on, and they would make lampshades out of you.
Yeah, right.
Am I right on that?
You're right. They were cruel, son of a bitch. Yeah, they were cruel.
Right. So when I used to hear stories like that, or with the little kids going into the gas chambers, I'm talking about 2 years old, 3 years old, 4 years old. That's when I felt, that really got to me. And I still think about it to this day. When
the war was over, the fellas that were there went to found these places, Buchenwald and all these concentration camps. They couldn't believe their eyes what they saw. When the generals called up, they said, General, you've got to come down here. You've got to see this to believe it. You have to see it. And when the generals saw these brutal concentration camps, they got so mad that they wouldn't allow us to speak to the Germans after the war. After the war, they said, if we catch you even talking to a German, we'll have you court-martialed. That's how mad they got. But then they started realizing you just can't get mad at the whole nation.
When I was there, Sal, when I was there, we couldn't fraternize with them at the time.
Absolutely.
None. And Eisenhower, who was the commanding officer of the Allied forces, he made the towns, some of the towns, the people get out of that town, the German people, and go see what your country did, your country did over there. Yeah. You see pictures of them with the bulldozers shoving bodies into the graves.
That's concentration. You can't believe how bad they were. I mean, their only sin was that they were Jews.
No, Jews. But besides Jews, there were 5 million non-Jews killed. A lot of the Kurds, the Gypsies, the homosexuals.
That's true.
But 6 million Jews, 5 million non-Jews.
That's true. He killed all people that were sick and infirmed and all that besides it. But of course the Jews got all the notoriety. But there were gypsies and there were elderly people. He killed them all. He killed everybody.
If you were sick, let's say you had a mental disorder, or if you were an autistic child, or an autistic adult, I hate to use that word, they would euthanize you.
That's right.
Yep.
That's right.
And they would do it by gas. First they tested those people out by pumping, they would put them in trucks and run the exhaust right back into the trucks.
That's right.
That didn't work too good.
That's
So there was a
right.
company in Frankfurt am Rhine called IG Farben. Remember IG Farben? They made the Cyclone B gas. That was a gas that when exposed to air would create like a cyanide effect, a poison. So what they did is they would tell the people you're going to take a shower.
Gee.
They
Yeah.
would put
Oh,
you,
yeah,
so you could,
that's how they bluffed them in.
right there.
How they bluffed them
Then
in.
they had a German Nazi guard on top of the roof. He would open up the vent, drop the tablets in, and as soon as they hit the
Boom.
air, it was cyanide, and he said you could hear the people screaming. And when they opened up the doors after it was all over, it was like a triangular shape of the people, one trying to get out on top of the other because the gas was killing them.
That's right.
And it only took 15 minutes. And then they used other prisoners to go in and clean up the mess.
Yeah, they told me it was a shower. They were going to get a shower. And they got a shower of gas.
Right.
Of gas.
So that's what it was
Oh,
like.
That was terrible.
Go ahead. Next.
Mr. You were stationed in the Pacific, right? So what was the Pacific life like during the war?
I'm glad I didn't go to the
What was it
Pacific.
like?
Yeah.
Oh.
Were you stationed in Japan? Where were you stationed?
I started in New Guinea.
New Guinea.
Went around the Halmahara group into the Philippines, Tacloban and Manila, Aishima into Tokyo at Tsugi Air Base.
Tell me something. Did you ever get malaria up there?
They gave us pills before. I didn't get it. And it turned me, I had jaundice before we landed.
Right.
And then for 5 days I took it and I ended up, I was there 20 and a half months. I never took another pill and I didn't get malaria.
Oh, you're lucky.
We were
You're
on a
lucky.
10-day, they toured us up from New Guinea around into the Philippines, and that a fellow with us got malaria bad, and his lips were all swollen and everything else, and that he took it every single day. When you went through the mess line in the commissary kitchen, they would open your mouth, they'd put the pill in your mouth, and they'd give you a little lemonade, and that was it. And that they used to give it to me, and afterwards they put it under my tongue and spit it out. And
Most of the people I ever knew that went to the
affected
TBI,
me.
I'd say 90% of them got malaria. And
Yeah.
malaria keeps coming back. It keeps
goes
coming
away.
back. Every once in a while they get
was
that
brutal.
shaking. And I've had friends that if they ever went to the CBI, oh yeah, did you get malaria? Oh yeah, I got that. Not only were they fighting the enemy, but they were fighting all the diseases in the CBI. That was the China, Burma, India operation. They were getting, well, at least in Europe, you were just fighting the enemy. There was none of that crap. But in China, you were fighting two things. You were fighting the enemy and the diseases. It was awful, very bad. Then they had Agent Orange. Oh my God, that was even worse. Those poor guys that went through hell. I'm glad I didn't go to the CBI. I'm telling you. I feel sorry for
General
the
Eisenhower was on the staff of MacArthur in the Pacific. He was a major.
Oh,
MacArthur sent him home in 1939.
that was terrible.
And a couple of years later, he was MacArthur's boss.
Yeah, that
And
was
that,
terrible.
there was no great love between MacArthur, Truman.
I know that.
Oh.
Well,
Truman.
I like both of them. I like
Yeah.
MacArthur and I like Truman. MacArthur was he was a cocky son of a gun,
Yeah,
but he was
in
a
love with
good
himself.
general. He was a great general. He knew his job, but he was a little bit on the cocky side. That's why they didn't like him.
I want to say one more thing, by the way, if I may, going back to Europe, that the leaders of Nazi Germany, Adolf Hitler committed suicide
Oh,
April
yeah.
the 30th.
Oh, yeah.
April the 30th committed suicide. Hermann Goring committed suicide.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, he did.
Heinrich Himmler committed
That's
suicide.
right.
But here's the worst part. Joseph Goebbels committed suicide with his wife, but he also killed his 6 little children.
Yeah,
He gave them cyanide
that son of a
tablets on
bitch,
there. Okay?
They
I just-
carried the under their tongue, and all they had to do was bite on it, and it would kill them inside of a few minutes. They carried it in their mouth. That's what Goring did that at the trial. He looked like everything was fine, but when he got in the jail, they found out they were going to execute him. He bit the vial, and he was gone.
Nobody here spoke about the Russians, by the way. We talk about the British, the French, the Americans, but the Russians were our ally. And they made a monument in Berlin, unter den Linden. It's called it's a Soviet monument outside the Brandenburg Gate, not far. And I spoke to a couple of Russian soldiers because we were all friends, really. Even though the blockade was on, we were still buddies because it wasn't them, it was the leaders. He told me he fought in the Battle of Stalingrad, which was like 40, 50 below zero. And he says, we were dressed for the winter, the Germans were, and they thought they'd be finished by the time the fall came around, the spring. He said it was so cold there, and I don't mean this sarcastically.
They weren't here for the winter. They weren't here at all.
Right, that they had to urinate, and I hate to use that word, on the bread because it was so hot that they couldn't eat it. They had to soften it up, and I'm not joking when I say that. That's what they told me on the Soviets. It was house-to-house fighting, like guerrilla warfare.
Yeah.
I mean, and hand-to-hand combat, but the Germans didn't anticipate that. And there was a general there called General von Paulus. He wanted to surrender. He got a note from Hitler to fight to the last man. But von Paulus said, no, I'm not fighting. He surrendered because he didn't want to see his troops die. It was the German 6th Army. So they surrendered at Stalingrad. It was in January, I believe, of 43.
But there's no doubt Hitler was mad. He was as mad as a mad hatter.
You ever read his book, Mein Kampf?
I've never read it. No, we've
Have
heard about it.
Have you heard about it?
Yeah.
Okay, My Battle.
He was a man that was going to make a Jewish. He was going to make a race. He was going to develop a beautiful race of German blue-eyed blondes. Now he was playing God.
Yeah.
He was playing. But how do you do that? How do you do that?
Sal, but take a look who he had on his thing for. He had Joseph Goebbels, who had a limp foot that couldn't walk straight. He had big fat Hermann Göring, that picture I showed you, who was a drug addict. He had Heinrich Himmler, who was a chicken farmer.
Well,
none of them looked.
That was one more we had to fight.
That's a picture of him losing weight there, by the way.
That was one more we had to fight.
As a matter of fact, he looked like an elephant when he first showed up at the German there. But I got to say one thing about him. People don't realize he was also an ace in World War I.
He was a what in World War I?
An air ace.
An air ace.
Yep. That's why he became head of the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force.
He says if the Americans bomb us again, call me, what's his name? They call himself a
Meyer?
Jewish name. Call me Meyer.
Yeah.
Call me Meyer.
Right.
And they bombed the hell out of him.
The British, I got to tell you, the British held out for a year, all alone, by themselves, until we got involved.
I love the British. They're wonderful people. They're wonderful people. They're brave, and they took an awful beating. I'll never forget them. I don't think the Americans could have taken the beating that they took. And they took an awful lot of it.
Benji.
All right, so we have one more question for all of you. Anyone can answer it. It's just
all of us together.
Yeah, whatever you guys want to do.
All brothers here.
All brothers, all right. It's when and where were you when you first heard about the bombing of Pearl Harbor?
I'll be quick on this one. I was playing baseball outside, and my mother came out. It was 2:30 in the afternoon on a Sunday. She yelled, get in the house, we're being attacked. I got into the house, there was a football game on, then the news bulletin came on. It was around 2:30 Sunday. Japan bombed Pearl Harbor. That's it. That's where I first heard it.
I've been to Honolulu. I've seen that what they did over there, where they sunk the Arizona.
Arizona, right.
Yeah, I've been. Even the Japanese go there, and they honor that place. Even today they go there. It's a very solemn occasion when you go there. The ship is in, 20 or 30 feet of water.
You can see the smokestacks right as you look down off the thing.
There's 1,500 bodies still in that park there.
They haven't been removed.
They left them right there.
Yeah.
They left them as a memorial.
Okay,
But
Tommy,
it's a
go ahead.
gorgeous
I was
looking
standing on a sidewalk at the corner of Beach Street and Broadway, and that everybody was enlisting the next day.
place.
We were all mad what happened and everything else, and let's go. We didn't know what it was.
Right.
But that was where we were and getting the news, and to me it was about 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
Today, Japan has no army to be.
No.
They said no more armies for us. We don't want
7
any
o'clock in the
armies
morning
anymore.
when they dropped the
No
bomb.
more armies.
Our worst enemies, Japan and Germany, are our
the
best
Philippines.
allies now.
Wow.
Okay, I got to say, our time is up, so I
Yep.
want to thank you, and I do mean that, really.
Thank you.
Benjamin, Joly,
Thank you.
thank you for coming and spending
you.
the time with us.
thank
Let me just say, God bless our troops. God bless the United States of America, the people that are there.